All right, so we are about 2 minutes past 2 o'clock. We're going to kick this off with the webinar, and we're going to start off by making the introductions. But I'm going to ask Justin if he can start sharing his screen with us, and that'll kind of take us through. All right, so welcome to the webinar, A Faster Way to Fly Safe, Compliance When You Need It. I'm going to be your host. My name is Christopher Todd. And this webinar today is brought to you by AiRXOS, part of GE Aviation. You're going to be learning all about AiRXOS over the next hour or so and about the amazing solution they're bringing into the public safety marketplace. Justin, if you want to take us to the next slide, we'll introduce the panel. And again, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch this webinar online at a later point in time. We'll get you that information after the webinar. But again, my name is Christopher Todd. I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm the Executive Director of the Airborne International Response Team, or AIRT. We are a 501c3 organization based in Miami, Florida that specializes in drones for good and supporting the use of unmanned systems around the world for disaster response. And our speakers today, Justin Steinke, who is the Regional Vice President of Sales for the Americas for AiRXOS, which again is part of GE Aviation. Also joining us, David Danielson, who is the UAS program co-lead and a firefighter with the Los Angeles City Fire Department. And of course, our own Chief Charles Werner, the Director of the Drone Responders Public Safety Alliance. Gentlemen, welcome to the program and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
Good afternoon.
Before we dive into this full speed, I think we want to go to the next slide, and we're going to be asking everyone a poll here in the audience. But first, Chief Werner, we've seen public safety drone solutions evolving pretty quickly here, especially it feels like in the last 2 years. Can you just kind of set the table for us from your perspective on kind of where the industry's at, like maybe in a quick 60-second overview on where we're at today and where things are heading in the near term?
So I think the biggest thing we've seen is the tremendous growth in the number of public safety agencies now that are moving in and implementing unmanned aircraft systems. But even more importantly, we're seeing the mature programs that are really starting to diversify their missions. And the mission set is so wide, it's been very impressive. And from that, it creates some complexities about how do we get up and fly more quickly. So we're looking at ways that we can do that. As you know, public safety operates under 2 sets of rules, and you have to choose one or the other in that situation, or possibly a third if you're going to use the SGI or ECOAs. So I think the exciting thing is we're seeing tremendous growth. We're seeing complexity starting to add into it, and we're running up with the need for a solution to be able to help solve those complex issues.
All right, so that is kind of the segue into this, and as many of you know, we recently conducted some research to better gauge what's happening in the public safety land space, in the public safety sector. So we're going to conduct a little poll right now, and we'd like to all of you to vote here on this question, which is, under what authority does your UAS program operate? Please check all that apply. This is a multiple choice. So if you're able just to check how you are operating your public safety UAS program, we'll be gathering this data and sharing it with you and comparing how it looks to the official air drone responders research data that we conducted. And right now we're seeing Part 107 is by and large the leading candidate, with about over 80% of our audience here operating under Part 107. We've got about 11% operating as a public aircraft operation. 14% have operated with special government interests, and we're under.
Chris, we might just indicate that public aircraft operation also may be considered if you have a certificate of authorization, a COA, just so
yep.
It may be not certain.
Great point. All right, so we're going to end this poll now in about 3, 2, 1. So basically we're sharing the results right there, and there we see 84% of the audience today operating under Part 107 UAS rule, 13% public aircraft operation, 13% SGIs. So really interesting, and I think that is kind of a good benchmark for us as we kind of delve into some of this content to understand that the majority of you are operating under Part 107. So Justin, if we can go to the next slide, and this is some data that we pulled from the actual Air Drone Responders survey. And the question was, how many remote pilots, drone operators currently participate in your public safety UAS program? And we're seeing the majority of programs are really 10 or less remote pilots. About 75% of the programs out there operating with 10 or less pilots. Chief, any thoughts on this? I mean, what does that really mean from your perspective?
Well, I think as we see the programs become more mature, which we're seeing the numbers increase in the 2 to 3 year mark, we're seeing that diversity in missions significantly increase. And then from that, it's requiring additional remote pilots to meet the new demand that we're facing.
All right, and Justin, if you can take us to the next slide and just poll question number 2. This was just one more poll we'd like to conduct here before we really dig into it. But it's basically, does your organization desire to conduct beyond visual line of sight public safety drone operations? So if you could just cast your vote here, we'll leave this up for about 30 seconds or less. And I'll tell you right now, from what I'm looking at, we've got about 93% do desire to conduct beyond visual line of sight drone operations.
And let me add a little flavor to this. We just have been working with the FAA where they've released a beyond visual line of sight tactical waiver that allows us to fly short distances around buildings that is going to be applicable. So that might change your answer from yes to no if you know that you actually have the ability to do that.
Yep, so we're going to end this poll right now, and we're going to share the results. And you're seeing that for the audience perspective, 90% of you are looking to fly beyond visual line of sight. That is actually higher than the drone responders AIRT research we conducted, where the public safety sector, we had a 75% desire to fly BVLOS. So obviously it is something that everyone wants to do, and getting that authorization is key to moving this forward. All right, so Justin, I think we're at the next slide here, and this will be the last data slide we get into from the Air Drone Responders research, but including training, how many public safety related UAS missions does your program typically fly each calendar month? And we're seeing 1 to 5 missions, 50% of the agencies out there, another 23%, 6 to 10 missions. So what this slide doesn't show that we looked at from the fall to the spring is the growth, both in the number of operators per program and the number of missions being flown per program. And Chief, any final thoughts there before we hand it over to Justin, just on how we're seeing the growth in the public safety sector from these programs?
No, I think to reemphasize, what we're seeing is as the programs become more mature and they learn more. One of the things we learned in our survey was that one of the most critical things people thought was valuable was to be able to learn how other departments are using unmanned aircraft systems, and from that, that increases their diversity in the missions that they can actually do themselves as well.
If I remember correctly, there was a lot of, in the 21 missions or more, that had increased pretty significantly between 2019 and 2020. So a lot more use this year than last year, which is really exciting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's probably a good segue over to you, Justin. I mean, what we're seeing is growth in the public safety sector. We're seeing more types of operations, a wider spread of mission sets as the experience starts to get underway. And now we really need the tools and the technology to help round this out, to streamline these operations and get everyone consistent in not only authorizing airspace, but pushing video from point A to point B. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you and have you introduce us to this exciting new product from AiRXOS.
Well, thanks very much. I really appreciate that. I've still got the poll results up in front of my screen. Is there any way to close that out?
Should be able to click the X on the box.
Oh, there it is. Got it. Cool. Right on. Very good. Well, thank you very much for having us. We're really excited to be here. We've taken public safety very seriously over the last couple of years, and it's really nice to work with drone responders and share the same mission of really expanding this technology throughout the industry. So we're very excited about this opportunity in this webinar. For those of you who don't know AiRXOS is actually the unmanned systems division of GE Aviation. We actually came out of GE Ventures, and we were really kind of the next phase of the aviation community as GE sees it. So a lot of things are going to the unmanned space, and this is really where we're heavily focused over the next long term. We've done a lot of really unique things at AiRXOS, and it's been a lot of fun to really focus on some of the advanced operations. That's been really our core focus ever since our inception. For those of you who haven't seen us in the news, we actually had the first beyond visual line of sight waiver without visual observers. That was a really big win for us last year. It was really exciting to be able to do that down in the Permian Basin in Texas. We've done on-airport aircraft inspections. We participated in an organ delivery in Baltimore last year. So our focus has always been really trying to enable a lot of the advanced operations that are relatively challenging for most folks, and making sure that this becomes scalable and this technology can be used across a number of different industries. As Chris alluded to with some of the data and some of the numbers, there's about 1.6 million drones out there, and only 171,000 pilots are actually certified. So there's a big gap, and we're starting to see that gap start to close. But UAS incursions are really one of the reasons we got started in public safety. Public safety was using drones, and a lot of hobbyists started interfering with a lot of the operations. So they were looking at ways to use technology to better that process. We found that 75%, I think some of these numbers actually came from you guys, drone responders, but 75% of public safety agencies are pursuing drone programs. So we're seeing a lot of growth. When we look at scalable markets for drone technologies, public safety is probably in the very top, because we're starting to see just rapid use cases and really a lot of public good, which has been fantastic. 70% of agencies are pursuing 107 waivers. We just saw that in the numbers that you did on the poll. But what's interesting is that 80% of agencies are operating without a COA. And so we've worked with dozens of agencies now, helping them get all the right COAs and waivers to make sure that they can fly and have all the access that they're looking for. And what we've found so far is that most agencies have about half of what they wish they had. They've got 107 operations, they've got COAs that allow them to do some flights, but they really would like to be able to do more. And as Chief Warner alluded to, you know, things like the tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver is really interesting, because it opens up a whole new set of opportunities, a whole new set of use cases where drones actually will be applicable to the different types of operations.
So Justin,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you there, but I think that's a really interesting point, is the fact that with AiRXOS, you're helping public safety agencies actually get those COAs. And I think that might be something that a lot of people maybe miss out on or haven't comprehended. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got kind of a unique business model in that we develop and design a lot of software solutions, and that's really our core business. But we do have an entire approval services team that works with our customers and makes sure that they actually have everything they need. And we've done some really unique stuff in public safety, including expanding COAs into 0-foot lance areas and restricted airspace. We've been able to really work with people to make sure that they can utilize this technology across their entire jurisdiction the way that they really like to.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then last point on here is that obviously with COVID, you know, this becomes a very interesting social distancing tool. A lot of people don't want to talk about drones and COVID because it automatically insinuates a surveillance tool, but that's really not what we're seeing out in the marketplace. You know, delivery of medical supplies, delivery of food, all of these things I think are going to rapidly accelerate due to COVID, and we're excited to watch all that stuff take place. So as I mentioned, AiRXOS has been heavily focused on advanced operations for a long time, and we actually look at public safety as maybe one of the more complex UAS operations out there. And the reason public safety is so challenging is really due to time. So time is the biggest challenge that everybody faces. If you can't get that drone in the air as fast as possible, it doesn't become a useful tool. And we find that to be a really interesting problem, because in most drone applications, technology becomes the issue. If you look at the energy sector and beyond visual line of flight work on long transmission lines, there's a technology problem there. There's a regulatory problem there. Public safety is unique because it's just time that we're up against. And so we actually started this process, and we started building out this solution about a year ago when we were working with the state of Washington, doing a technology trial with about a half a dozen different public safety agencies. And what we learned is that time really can be broken down into 3 different areas. One is compliance, and compliance is everything from getting the right COAs and waivers ahead of time, having a good understanding of what you need to do when you go flying, to complying when you're actually going out to fly. So making sure that you've got internal checklists, make sure everybody's following the same set of rules. If you've got external pilots that help you occasionally, make sure that they're all in compliance. I think a lot of the industry focuses on airspace as the big compliance piece, but the reality is that operations really expand way beyond that into internal agency rules, state level rules, federal rules, and airspace rules. So making sure that all of that is buttoned up real nicely together is very important. The operating suite was an area that was really surprising to us. So public safety was advancing very, very quickly with drones. However, most operators had 5 or 6 different applications on their phone, and that becomes a huge challenge for everybody. It's not easy to train dozens of new pilots. If you have to train them on 5 or 6 different applications, it becomes a real barrier to entry. So we took that very serious. And then situational awareness, which has been a big part of public safety for a long time. But when you look at how drones are operated, situational awareness is not just awareness of the airspace, but it's awareness of the operation itself. So things like the video that we've integrated that can now be streamed back to an operations center or to other participants who are part of that operation really helps promote the full level of situational awareness. And I think one thing that isn't spoken about a lot from a situational awareness perspective is actually the public. Making sure that people stay out of the way, make sure that they know that that's a LA Fire Department drone and they're there to find a missing child. You know, they're not there to spy on you. You know, that type of gap that we have in bridging the understanding of that is something that we took very, very serious. So these 3 things really were the core result of what we learned in our tech trial. And so we've launched our public safety solution, which is really comprised of a web-based, desktop-based air mobility platform, as well as our mobile application. And so when we looked at all the different tools that people need to operate, we realized that they all need to reside in one app. So we talked about airspace access. So we have Lance built into this. Obviously, we're one of the Lance providers. As Chief Warner alluded to, the SGI, or Emergency COA process, is built into our app. For those of you who have used it, to date, it's still a very paper-based process. You got to fill out a form. You got to send that into the FAA. The SOSC office is incredibly responsive. We work with them all the time. However, the process is still just very outdated. So we've digitized that because we know who you are. We know what the form needs to look like. We know the data that needs to go into that. And if we can make that a click of a button in an emergency, we can save people like Dave Danielson 5 or 10 minutes, that goes a long way. So we've built all that in there. Automated alerts and advisories. Advisories are created from the application and can be distributed to people who need them. So you can distribute it to the public if that's of interest and it's not a sensitive operation. You could distribute it to people like the media when they bring in their helicopters to look at that forest fire and get footage for the news. But we've got all that engagement that can go on from this app in an automated way, which is really important because you really don't have time to spend to be able to push all that data out there. The situational awareness that's built into the app really shows all the different operations that you might have under your organization. So in a lot of cases, you might have multiple drones operating, in which case you want to see where everybody is and you want to be able to coordinate with them. So being able to communicate with them through the app and understand how to reach them and who's actually operating that drone. We've built all that into the application to make this as simple and easy as possible. And then we've got remote ID. I mean, obviously remote ID is something that's coming out soon. AiRXOS leads a lot of the groups that are starting to look at remote ID and how this is all built in and built together. I think remote ID for public safety is going to be of huge importance just so that we know who's flying, where they're flying, who they are, and how to coordinate with them. So that'll be another layer that goes into our system at a certain point in time. So as we kind of alluded to, AiRXOS is very unique in the fact that we really try to take these 3 buckets and make sure that we deploy this out to all the agencies that we work with. So from a compliance standpoint, we work on all the waivers and exemptions. We make sure everybody has the right COAs and the right authorizations to operate. We've also got the airspace rules built into the system. So Lance and the SGIs are all built in there. So you're fully in compliance with what you're doing. The last thing anybody wants to do is hire somebody to manage compliance for a new drone program that might have 5 or 10 people. That becomes a real barrier to scaling that program out. We've got the operating tools, so being able to operate from our mobile applications, our web-based applications, and distribute all the data and manage everybody that's in your organization as part of our public safety solution. And then you've got the the air mobility platform that operates as your operational center. So you got full situational awareness of where everybody's at. You've got reports that can be generated from that data, so you don't have to have somebody collecting spreadsheets or collecting checklists that people have created. And then you've got video, so you've got the ability to stream information back and be able to better and more efficiently deploy resources as you are engaging these different types of emergencies. And one of the things I don't think is talked a lot about in this space is, we've got authenticated end users and, things like two-factor authentication in our system. We've also got a lot of cybersecurity that we've done to make sure that this is secure and that is protected, because that is obviously going to be increasingly important as we all move forward on this.
Yeah, that's a great point too with the cybersecurity. That's something that we've recently focused on with drone responders and the 5 Cs that we released earlier this week, and we'll
Sure.
be talking more about that in the next week or so.
Yeah, and it's an area where GE's been really lucky to have other GE business units that work in energy and power, and obviously the cybersecurity aspect of those industries is very severe, and so we have to take that very seriously. So we're able to reapply a lot of that understanding to our public safety offering. So as you kind of alluded to in one of your polls, there's a lot of different ways to fly. And one of the challenges that public safety faces is that, you may have operations that you actually operate Part 107, even if you have a COA. You might operate under your public COA because it's better fitting there. And so as we looked at how our tool would operate with the public safety industry, we want to make sure that it always started from the same point from workflow perspective. And regardless of where you wanted to fly, you had all of the right information you needed to be able to do that. And it could help automate some of those decisions so that, you might have very experienced pilots, you might have new pilots, and you want to make sure that at the end of the day, everybody's doing the right thing and all that information is built into one solution. So compliance is a huge part of this. It's something that a lot of people get caught up in. There's a lot of different opportunities to fly. And as I mentioned before, making sure you have all the right elements to your COA is obviously increasingly important as we all move forward. And a lot of these programs mature, they want to expand. And that's something that we've been helping a lot of people with. The air mobility platform, I've covered most of this already, but obviously we authenticate all of our end users. We automate all the airspace advisories. We're able to send out all the authorizations needed, whether that's a Lanthus authorization or that's something like the SGI process. We can distribute the video. We can send out SMSs. We've got a partnership with Cineverse, which allows us to actually broadcast SMSs just like an Amber Alert. So if your county wants to have their constituents opt into that, they can receive messages anytime that one of the public safety organizations goes out and flies, just so that they're aware of the operation, they know what's going on. I always use the same use case of if I'm sitting out in my backyard sunbathing and I see a drone, at first, I may not like that, but if I get the alert to my phone that says they're looking for a missing child, all of a sudden I think it's great. And I want to make sure that that drone is successful. So that communication gap that's always been there is something that we've put a lot of technology into bridge. Remote ID is something that will continue to get added into our system as all those standards get deployed. And then agency training and internal checklists are all part of our digital workflow. One of the things that we've learned with a lot of agencies is that everybody's got good checklists, but typically they're paper-based. A lot of times they don't get done. A lot of times they get lost. And so when you start looking at compliance from the standpoint is everybody doing what they should be in this operation, it gets really difficult to be able to audit that and go back and track everybody to make sure they've done what they were supposed to. So our digital checklist requires you to, tap the check mark and make sure that everything is done. And then it's emailed to you. So if you want to tuck that into a case file or put it away for later, you've got a copy of everything that's been going on. And even those small steps are really important to making sure that everybody's operating within compliance. And I think that's about it from the presentation side of things. So I do have a short video demo we can go through, but Chris or Charles, if you guys want to talk about anything more, we can talk.
I have a question,
Sure.
Justin. So I'm reading through and I'm thinking, SGI really stands out at me as something that's it's critical and we're working on, and you may get into this a little bit later, but right now it's either a phone call and or accompanied by some paper that goes back to the FAA, and then they've got to kind of start from scratch at that point and go through and get things done. And they are very responsive, when we have our hats off to the SOSC all the time. How does this change that?
Sure. No, it's a great question. So backing up a little bit, AiRXOS has a partnership for safety program, a PSP, with the FAA, which is a relationship that we have to work with them on a variety of different projects. And one of our projects, as of very recently, is the SGI process. And we brought this to the table because we recognize that SGIs are being used more and more year over year. And the agency actually couldn't expand to the point to be able to accommodate that. And a lot of the issues with the SGI are that it's still paper-based, and that it takes some time for them to take the handwritten coordinates that you give them and actually put those onto a map and see what it is that you're requesting. So by digitizing this, we've saved a lot of time on both ends of it. I think, from our perspective, there's still two ways to do it, even in our application. If it's a real dire emergency, the phone call is always going to be the fastest thing, because they do pick up the phone, 24/7, and they're very responsive to that. They do generally require you to send the form in after the fact anyway. But, from our perspective, I know who you are. So all your pilot information and all that detail is already in that form. So we've auto-filled that. When you've created the advisory in our application, which takes a matter of a couple of seconds, now I know where you want to fly, and we've translated that into the FAA's lingo. So they require this to be in degrees, minutes, seconds, which most people don't know actually how to translate themselves. So we do all that on the back end, and then we autofill the form. So it's really only 2 or 3 questions to be able to submit that. And so the way it's getting used in practice now is that most people will go through our SGI process digitally, which only takes them, 10 or 15 seconds. They'll submit that, and then they'll make the phone call. So when they pick up the phone, they already have all the information that they're requesting, and it's much faster for them to approve that process.
And Justin, we've got a question coming in from one of our drone responders members. Sure. Across the pond, David Lane, who's asking, is AiRXOS only going to be active for the US at this point, or is it going to be available to international audiences as well?
Yeah, we work on a couple different projects in the UK, so we're starting to expand there. We're starting to expand into a number of different countries. So depending on where they're at, we'd love to talk to them and figure out how we can work in that particular country.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Chief Warner, did that answer your question?
Yes, and we have a question from the chat saying, will this also include a logbook function for different users? Secondly, is there an ability to pull reports for COA flights for submitting the info as required?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So when we started this process, we did have a reporting tool, which we still have, that does record all the flights, who flew under, what conditions they flew under, if it was a COA or 107, the SGIs that were filed, all that stuff is all tracked, which is really nice. We are now building out a lot of the crew and asset management tools. So what we've learned is kind of interesting from a public safety standpoint, is everybody actually approaches that problem a little differently. So some people track every part on that drone, and they want to make sure they know how many hours are on that rotor. Other departments look at some of the cheaper drones as kind of disposable, and if it's not working, they buy a new one. So there's a huge gap between the way that people do things, and so we wanted to make sure we gathered all that data. We worked with our internal flight team to develop a crew and asset management tool that was actually scalable and expandable between those 2 different types of users.
So, and just a quick housekeeping here. I know many of you out there probably have questions. If you want to type your questions using the question and answer feature, we'll get to the rest of the questions at the end of the presentation. But Justin, yeah, I think if you can take us into the first responder demo, and then we'll hear from David at LA Fire, that'd be awesome.
Let's do it. Give me just a second. All right, I'm going to talk through this as it goes through the process. So this is just a video capture of everything that we've been working on. So all of our workflow starts and centers on your current location. So the app opens up, it opens up to the map, it opens up and centers on exactly where you are. A lot of times people actually want to file this for an area they're headed to. So I'm sure David can attest to this. If you're on the way to an area, you actually want to file for that particular area. So once you get there, you can actually draw any shape that you want as to where you're going to operate. And this is always the start of our workflow. We enter a name for it. We give it a category, we give it upper lower boundaries, all the things that you would need for Lance or the SGI process, etc. And then we give it a start and stop time. So making sure that we know how long we're going to be there and what we're trying to do. Any of that can be edited at any point in time. And then we've got that public feature that we talked about, where if you want SMSs to go out to people internally or externally, you've got that opportunity. In this particular case, it's in a Lance grid. So we're going to go through the Lance process, and our system is intelligent enough to tell you, hey, you're in a Lance grid, you need to go through the Lance process. And since we've got all of your information already and all the Lance requirements, we can actually quickly send you through that process. So the advisory is generated, it's created, and then it's going to push me into the Lance system here in a second to be able to submit that. And this is very similar to, probably other Lance systems that you've seen. You go through all the Lance compliance and make sure that you're meeting the requirements that the FAA requires. And then we'll file that Lance request and get that back here real quickly. And you'll see on the left screen, that particular advisory that's created will pop up on the screen there, and you have a lot of detail. So you're able to look at that. If this did require something like the SGI, it would just funnel me right into the SGI process, and it would automate that process so that I could go through it real quickly. But I've got all the information about my advisory there. Lance was submitted, everything was successful. This is where we start our checklist. So these checklists are configurable, so it can be any checklist from anybody. This is a particular one we worked on with the state police agency, but these are all the things that they want people to put into their checklist prior to flight. So they'll go through the different elements of that particular checklist, make sure that they're meeting all the requirements that they have. If they're flying 107 or under COA, they're able to select that information. And as I mentioned, when this is completed, you can actually hit submit, and it sends you a copy of this to your email. So you've got your completed checklist for that particular operation. Like I said, most people will tuck that into a case file, and should compliance ever come up, they've got a good record of everything that they did for that particular flight. So everything's been done, and you're ready to fly. And then on the operational side of things, from an ops center or from any desktop, you can watch and monitor all these advisories that have been created. If you've got multiple pilots out there flying all at the same time, you'll see you've got all your advisories listed there. You can look at any of the advisories that you've got. With the new video feature, which isn't in this particular video, there's a link there to the video so you can see what that drone is seeing at any given time. So you really have full situational awareness of your operation across all the different pilots that you've got flying. And that's about it.
That's cool. And Justin, I got to tell you, I mean, I'm looking here at the chat. Carl Blando from Boston PD, Boston Police Department. Obviously, he caught his eye with the Watertown demonstration. He wants to speak with you at some point. Good. And Carl, just want to say hello to you. It was great meeting you at the Drone Responders Summit last fall. So glad you could make it to the webinar.
Yeah, we'll have some contact information here at the end, and we can connect with Carl. Looking forward to that.
So why don't we, I know we want to bring David Danielson into the conversation and kind of get his take, because David, you've been using this out at Los Angeles City Fire Department. What can you tell us about what you think this means for your operations and how it's going to change things?
Well, thank you, Chris, and thanks, Justin, for your presentation, and also Charles for your efforts with drone responders. Here at Los Angeles Fire Department, we've certainly gone through a lot of the aches and pains that most of the public safety agencies have gone through on developing our program, developing how we're going to get our airspace management done, and also to create some form of standardization as we go through the development of our program. So, you know, definitely want to talk about the value of this application and how we progress. But just to give you a little background on LA Fire Department's UAS program, we started over 3 years ago, much like most of the other agencies, as Part 107 became a reality. We got through the process with Los Angeles City Council. So as most of you know, the process going through a city, especially something as large as Los Angeles, you know, going through Fire Commission and then the Safety Committee and then City Council is pretty pretty daunting, and certainly there's a lot of record keeping that comes into that. So, you know, a lot of what Justin's talking about on the front end on airspace authorization, on the back end, the reporting process is pretty monstrous. So, you know, overall, you know, drones in public safety, and especially here in Los Angeles, how we see it is our goal is to have a deployment of drones to, you know, really fight an all risk response. You know, primarily we're focused on fire, whether it's, you know, downtown structure fire or brush incidences and such. Our goal is to improve on our efficiencies and certainly, you know, train drone pilots in order to support our ground resources and our incident commanders. Even more, we're aimed at, you know, getting our drones out there in a timely manner and to really provide accurate communication, and having a mobile, you know, application such as AiRXOS here can really be a game changer on how we're able to get our drones into the incident, provide that situational awareness for the incident commanders, and even down to our resources with boots on ground. So within the beginning of our program, those issues really showed themselves early on. The first month of starting our program was back in November, December of 2017. And as most of you recall, that was a major wildfire season. Wildfire incidences going on across the state of California. And in our very own Los Angeles, we had what was called the Skirball incident, where the 405 was absolutely an inferno going through the Bel Air, risking the Bel Air Estates area. We deployed for our first time officially out with our drone program. Both myself and co-lead firefighter Derek Ward went out to provide UAS, primarily to give that aerial situational awareness and to, in the end, provide thermal imaging and hotspot identification. What was very interesting on this incident was we were immediately pushed into a multi-aircraft environment. We had a TFR up, temporary flight restriction, and our very own LAFD air operations was flying water drops. And that certainly presented a high-risk mitigation problem for us. Fortunately, because of how we laid out the program and the confidence of our leadership, we were given the go-ahead, but it really brought to our minds that, you know, we really need to develop a deconfliction tool. You know, fortunately, we fall under our helicopter command, and we're in communications with what we call HELCO, and everybody's aware of what we do. But there are times when maybe that TFR is not up, and you have other aircraft that are incurring into the airspace that you perceive that you're going to be flying. So on that incident alone really brought forward for both Derek and myself to think about how we mitigate that airspace and get our drone operators up and going. So in the end, it was very successful because we got a lot of lessons learned, but we pushed forward and really started thinking about standardization and how we get that interoperability up. Other incidences that LA Fire is actively participating in is using drones today, supporting our brush inspections most recently. Very, very great discussion throughout our city and up through city council on how we can use the drones to support our brush clearance unit. With that, it goes into the discussion about mapping, using the drones for mapping, not only for the inspections, but also during brush fire incidences, where we're able to rapidly get an identification of acreage and the burn area. Obviously using thermal imaging for hotspot identification. That has been really interesting because we've not only brought it into just giving that overview aerial, but also providing direct support for our firefighters that are cold trailing, you know, spending a lot of resource, a lot of manpower to go out and cold trail those burn areas. Now using the drone pretty much as a pathfinder to get right on top of those hot spots and direct those fires there is not only saving on resource, but it's also mitigating the safety for those firefighters. So there in itself, the drones have certainly proved their worth. So, you know, I'm going to fast forward and just get right to it, which is how do we get them up and be a usable resource, a usable tool for those firefighters and the incident commanders in the field? Well, bottom line, you have to have remote pilots that are trained to understand the national airspace and to mitigate any of those airspace issues. As Justin, you know, indicated, most of us are running a paper drill. I mean, literally, if you looked at my original flight planning, you know, I was taking a lot out of my prior, you know, existence as a naval air crewman and you know, drafting out a flight plan and feeding it or building it out so it would feed into some type of reporting process. That would get daunting. I mean, not only are we putting in all the elements that you see on this application for AiRXOS, but, you know, I'm throwing in my weather, I'm throwing in, you know, literally the information coming off of the UAS facilities map for Lance. You know, it's a lot of cut and paste that goes into that document. In the long run, it was worth it because in 2019, we got approached by City Council and the independent auditor to come out and produce a document that highlighted our entire year of drone operations. So having that reporting process on the back end, literally, I'm not kidding you, we had about a 400-page document that we had to produce, and it was all Excel spreadsheets and flight plans that we had written out. So again, having a one-stop shop of pre-flight planning tools to the actual airspace, actual operational monitoring, to the final product of post-flight, after-action reporting, and then repository to be able to produce those types of documents is huge. It's a time saver. It definitely, you know, cuts a lot of the extra work that we don't need to do.
So David, I think Justin made a really interesting point earlier too. He said, he made the point that if you need to, you know, go after an SGI, he thought you could save maybe 5 to 10 minutes. How important is that when you're on scene in the field at an incident?
So I'm gonna ad lib on this one, just to jump right into a story on it. Was, you know, we have, you'll see in another slide, we have just an amazing and intense airspace with, you know, over 8 to 9 different airports. You brought it up right there. So, you know, look at the sectional chart right there. And then, you know, as comparison, look at the UAS facilities map and all of the Lance grids right there. And the interesting point, you know, I'll sidebar on this is, you look at that UAS facilities map, and if that's all you're training your remote pilot to understand, then you realize when you look at the sectional map, there's a lot of hazards. There's a lot of different issues that we should be thinking about. So, you know, we had an incident with a air crash off of one of our local area airports, and it was on a weathered day. Visibility was low. We weren't able to fly our helicopters due to the ceiling. And the issue was that aircraft was flying an IFR corridor coming into the airport. And the reality is you need a quick, fast tool to be able to identify all those issues that are going to happen in that area. Now, frankly, you know, we have different levels of experience of firefighters trained. Sure, we have the background of Part 107. We studied for the test. But how much are we really digesting what's going on? Having a mobile application that identifies it and can lead you down the path to decide whether you're flying Part 107, and obviously in that case we are not. We're going to be flying under our COA. However, the informed pilot is going to be thinking, look, there's special circumstances here. I'm in an IFR corridor with an airplane crash. We're doing a search and rescue for whoever was on board using that, using our thermal. What else can I do to mitigate this? Now, certainly an eCOA would be a great use case there, and to be able to have it digitized onto this application that can rapidly process everything that you had put in to your pre-flight planning, and it gets sent directly to the SOC desk, for which, you know, literally it's a phone call, confirm you've got, you know, confirm that you've got or received the ECOA, and they punch it out and boom, you're good. That's a game changer. That will absolutely streamline, and what I hope, because I'm very much a standardizations guy, that it's going to push our firefighter remote pilots and all over public safety pilots to not shortchange that risk mitigation process, but really elevate and get the FAA involved as a partner to risk mitigate. That's great. And I don't think anybody loses for that. In fact, we all win, because it shows that we're a partner in the safety of the national airspace.
So David, let me add something to what you're saying. I just wanted to make a point here. As we continue to see this becoming a critical tool for public safety, no question. I mean, we know that drones enhance safety for responders and citizens. It improves our operational effectiveness, and it gives us better situational awareness in near real time. As that continues to increase, we're going to have more and more of the need for SGIs, which means at some point we're going to come to that maximum point where a phone call just isn't going to work anymore, just because of the sheer numbers. Just pointing that out.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And my emphasis right now, because this is a new process, you know, absolutely every one of us is, you know, crossing the T's, dotting the I's on this, because we're all within public safety and drone programs. We're all not only administratively or agency invested, but we're personally invested. You know, most of the, you know, public safety members out there are passionate about this because we see what it is. It's given the eye in the sky and the situational awareness that is bar none giving us more information that the incident commanders and resources can act upon. That absolutely. So, you know, to make that phone call, I would hope that, yes, we're going to mature this process to the point where it's as easy as that Lance request. But I think it's important that we do understand that, you know, not just public safety drone, but commercial drone, and overall the FAA itself is in this growth period that we need to all work in partnership and communicate, you know, follow up with that phone call, make, you know, know our alliances and our relationships, and make it a better program.
So Justin, if you want to take us to the next slide, I think that'll kind of, you know, David, I think a lot of what you were saying and kind of, you know, touched on here. I mean, this is really the value benefit, I think, if I'm hearing you correctly. Yeah.
So, you know, the value overall of having a mobile-based application is, bottom line, we get up and we're flying. And it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. What's important for us here with the Safety UAS program is that with these applications, it's going to get us up and running faster, but we're educating ourselves to use the new tool, use the new technology. Certainly, you know, it's our responsibility to understand a sectional chart. That's what we're testing for, right, to maintain the Part 107. But having technology like this is going to really highlight and get us focused on what we need to know right now in order to be able to get that drone up and fly. And you know, on the back end of it is using this tool as a teaching tool as well. When we do our after action reporting based off of the information that we put in, it's a great way to re-emphasize with the drone pilots that, guess what? You guys are aviators, bar none. I think that is done, right? Drone pilots are aviators. We have been from the start. And looking at this type of tool, we're improving upon the national airspace and the safety within the national airspace as a whole. So when you look at this, sorry, go ahead.
No. I was going to say, please continue your thought. We got about 9 minutes left here, so we'll get to some questions. But yeah, I want you to keep going.
So I'll wrap up with this piece. Again, I'll go back to my, you know, my role as the standardization lead is my greatest fear is that with technology, with it being exponential the way it is, you got to remember that aviation as a whole has taken generations, right? Decades upon decades of lessons learned. And within the drone industry, the drone space, we're doing it literally in the last 3 years. We have just absolutely exponentially exploded, not just with the platform, but with the tools like this that we're seeing. And, LAFC UAS as a whole, thankfully have been in great relationship with organizations like DRONERESPONDERS, and through that, through the industry with, groups like AiRXOS and all, to really have that strong conversation, because standardization is key. I got to train firefighters to be able to understand this tool and get them trained to become that pilot and risk mitigate throughout every step of the process. And so, in conclusion, having this one-stop shop and the ability to be able to go through that process is not only a great way to understand the risks of our growth, but it's overall giving us and our leadership the ability to understand that this is a huge responsibility. It is a new future discipline, if not already, that emergency workers will deploy, because the value overall just is bar none priceless.
Awesome,
And
David.
I think with that, that's pretty much what I got. I appreciate you all letting me participate and give you our points of view from LAFC UAS. Thanks for the opportunity.
No, thanks for your wisdom, because I'll tell you, for those out there who may not be familiar with you directly, I mean, I haven't met anyone who's more versed in public safety aviation and in the manned aviation and the unmanned component from the airspace perspective and the training and the certification as you are. So I think, the points you hit were right on. So I want to quickly go back to Justin here so we can learn how public safety agencies can really get more information about AiRXOS, and then we'll take a few questions here with the time we have left. Justin?
Yeah, sounds good. David, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I know that you guys are always very busy, and we appreciate every moment that we get, so thank you. So after the webinar, we'll email everyone and find a way to reach out and see if people would like to take a look at what we've got and figure out how to get people on board. We've got a name and email address and phone number up on the screen for Mo Smith. Mo is our head of customer success here at AiRXOS. So Mo will get everybody set up with what they need. So please reach out to us, even if it's just a question about COAs or waivers or any of our technology. We'd love to hear from you and love to help you guys accelerate these drone programs.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. And Chief, I want to push it in your direction now. We've got about 10 questions on the board. Not sure if we can get to all of them in the 6 minutes or so we have left, but if you can kind of take us through some of the questions in the Q&A that you think are that we can respond to, that would be awesome.
Sure. I see one of the questions on here says, do you have drone detection solution built into the system to create awareness of media or consumer drones that may be flying around the incident?
So we try to stay as agnostic as possible to all the different systems that we can integrate into our system. So obviously we've been on about 12 or more than a dozen different FAA, NASA, and White House programs now, kind of leading the way that the UTM will be serviced over time. So the short answer is yes, we can put some of that stuff in there. We try to stay agnostic to everything that we put into our system, but if there's a sensor or a radar or some other technology that you'd like to see in your picture, we can certainly do that.
Okay, and then I've got one. Can this platform streamline the process for requesting follow-on waivers, examples of operations extended to night, et cetera?
It can. So we help people with night waivers all the time, and that's definitely a big part of our business. So we can definitely do that. And if that's a compliance area that you want tucked into the application, we can make sure that that's a part of checklists and other things that are really important to that compliance element.
Okay, next question is, does the advisory file a NOTAM on your behalf?
So we're working on the NOTAM piece. We should have that done here fairly shortly, but that's something that we're putting in a process now.
Okay, and is there an API for AiRXOS for machine-to-machine operation?
Good question. So we do have a lot of APIs. We are starting to talk to people about how to connect, different parts of this ecosystem and these environments. So we do have some APIs set up, working on some others. If there's something in particular that you're interested in, please feel free to reach out to us and we can talk about how we might be able to integrate that.
And will this support all UAV platforms that are available?
It's a good question. So the app itself and the way that this advisory service operates is it's completely standalone from the UAV until the point where you want to streamline the video. So the video solution to date works with all the DJI drones. There's an application through a partner of ours, company's called KSI, which is really a fantastic company. They've been working with AT&T and FirstNet for some time now and are actually listed on the FirstNet store. So it's really the only video distribution system we've seen that's actually gone through a cellular network certification process to be able to make sure it can actually operate. Obviously, drones pump out 4K video, so being able to do that is cumbersome to a network. So having the right solution is really important. So the short answer is it'll work with all the DJI aircraft, and we are working on a number of others. If there's something that you're working with that's non-DJI, there are some other options. So please reach out to us, and we can talk to you about how to make all that happen.
I got two questions here on cost. How do you go about costing out the application?
Sure. So cost is somewhat dependent on the number of pilots and the number of consumers of the data. Obviously, especially with the video, pumping up video is cumbersome to networks and storage, et cetera. So our costs vary typically between $4,000 and $6,000, but certainly reach out to us and we can make sure we get the right price for the size of your organization and the operations you're doing.
Question is, does the AiRXOS system address rogue drones over fires and major incidents?
So rogue drones would have to be identified through another system so that we'd know that they're there. So some type of counter UAS technology, but the integration of that would be possible. So we can certainly talk about how to make that particular environment safer. Okay,
one question for you, Justin. Then I'm going to switch over and wrap up with David.
Sure.
The question is, where'd it go? Lost the question.
There is one in there about micro weather for valleys, lakes, hilly terrain at the surface, and AGL, go and no go, stoplight, flight risk solutions. If you're looking at anything like that,
so we do have some. Yeah, we do have some weather in there. We are looking at some of the micro weather scenarios. I think the use cases for micro weather vary pretty drastically. So we're looking at the right solutions to be able to do that are also cost effective. Obviously, public safety is a cost sensitive environment, so we want to make sure that we don't overburden them with a lot of costs on the micro weather side. So we're looking at a couple of different options now.
So one last question for you, Justin, says, I'm in the Caribbean. Is there plans for the Caribbean in the near future?
So I would love to come down and see you in the Caribbean. That sounds great.
You need of us to go with you.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, we can work on the Caribbean, and we get maps and charts and everything from a lot of different places. So definitely reach out to us. We'll figure out how to make that work.
And there was one question here for David that asked, how do you coordinate the various public safety agencies in your area as far as flights?
Good question.
Yeah. So simply put, it's a phone call. On our original flight plan, we have all of the numbers listed for the surrounding agencies, and we contact direct to their air operations to give them the standard, location, lat long, altitude, and hours of operation. However, again, the goal in the future with mobile application is to train with our surrounding agencies and standardize what tools we can use. And I'm looking forward to that day when I'm able to pull up and see, the other agencies surrounding us and what operations they have.
So if everybody was operating off the same application, it would really streamline the process, I take it.
Yeah, and not only just those agencies, but the question or the discussion came up about media. I won't go into the details of it, but we recently had a circumstance where you have contracted media out there flying drones during our incidents. And certainly, that's a hazard, but if they can do it safely and they can be respectful of the emergency area, and we essentially create a boundary, they can still go and do their job. And certainly we would support that. Our public information officer currently is engaged with a discussion at that level on how we create some guidance in that realm. And if they can come on board as well with a mobile application where everybody plays nice in the sandbox, that would be awesome.
All right. And we are at the 1 hour mark. So I know there's a couple more questions that are popping up in the Q&A. And we'll make sure that we get those over to Justin and David, and we get answers to those of you who have popped them in. But let's get some final thoughts here, and then I'll have a few housekeeping notes. But David, any final thoughts from your perspective?
Just to sum up what I said, it's absolutely important that all of us within the drone community, whether it's public safety, commercial, and at the recreational level, that we recognize our role within the national airspace, that we are aircraft flying in that airspace, and it's our job and responsibility to mitigate the risk. Every time we fly, we are the risk. So with that mindset, that we continue to work together, communicate, and share to build better processes, build better, understanding of what this industry is doing and how we can apply it. Absolutely, thank you all for allowing us to participate today. Again, Charles, great work with drone responders, and Chris and Justin, thank you.
All right, Justin, over to you.
Yeah, again, I want to echo that. Thank you very much for having us. This has been fantastic. And David, thank you for your time. I think to echo what David said, it's going to be increasingly important as time goes on that, these solutions get easier and simpler. I can tell you from our perspective, we've learned a lot from our customers, and that's been really, really key and important. So if anybody needs any help or, sees something that isn't there that they wish they had, that's the kind of feedback that helps us continue to grow this. But we're very excited about a public safety solution. We're very excited to work with everybody that's been listening here. So I look forward to hearing from folks and seeing how we can help accelerate a lot of their programs.
Thanks, Justin. And Chief, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that what we've seen is that drones, unmanned aircraft systems, whichever term you want to use, is now becoming a critical tool of public safety. As David mentioned, it's really about having a safety culture in the national airspace. And as we get more complicated in airspaces like Los Angeles and others, as well as the increased use of drone usage, and then as we migrate into urban air mobility, which is on its way, we need to really have the tools that will allow us to fly safely in the national airspace. And these are one of those tools that will help us do that.
All right, and thank you all for joining us today on the first Drone Responders Technology Series webinar. We hope you enjoyed it. Let us know what your thoughts are. Also, if you're looking for more content out there, visit droneresponders.org/podcasts. You'll see the Drone Responders UAS for Public Safety and Fire Rescue podcast hosted by Chief Werner. You'll see Taming Disaster, Drones for Good hosted by myself. And I also want to let you know about another webinar we're going to be having 1 week from today. And you can register for that webinar right now at 5cswebinar.droneresponders.org. You'll also be getting an email here within the next hour about that. But Chief, you want to tell us a little bit about the 5 Cs and what we're going to be covering on that webinar next week?
Yeah, 5 Cs basically is a collaboration on information about responsible flying and maintaining public trust. And we're doing something to build a foundation with that. And we'll also be talking about the new tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver with the FAA as well. And that's the 5 Cs is something that we did in collaboration with Skydio.
So that registration for the 5 Cs webinar next Thursday, July 30th, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock Eastern time, now open at 5cswebinar.droneresponders.org. I'm Chris Todd. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. You'll see it online. You can see video playback coming soon to AiRXOS and droneresponders.org. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.